Hi everyone, I'm the second half of the team with Taylor that will be helping you learn to fish and fishing along with you and making mistakes and learning from it and passing along everything that I can learn as well. Today's video is going to be all about how to read the fishing regulations in Ontario. It can be a little dry and a little confusing, but that's what we're here for, and I'm going to walk you through it. It's probably going to be a 4-part series just because it can get a little bit time consuming to go over. So here's what the two regulations look like, last year's and this year's. So typically this is a hard copy. It's got my name on it because around the office it's a hot commodity, and you can see that it's a fairly thick document. It's got about 130 odd pages this year. This one is actually this year's, and it's even thicker because they've increased the font, so we have an even thicker document. And the good news is there isn't 147 pages to memorize. I'm going to walk you through how to use it. We're going to go over the next probably 3 videos the first 23 pages of details, and then we're going to get into how to actually go through and fish different zones. So I'm going to get set up on the computer and follow along digitally because it's a lot easier to follow. Okay, so I'm back on the computer and we'll walk everyone through the regulations on the digital format so it's easier to read along. First steps is to download it either to your phone or the computer. That way, if you're out fishing and you've got it on your phone or tablet, it's handy and you can reference it all the time, or you can go and read it online without downloading it. So I'm going to just type in Fishing Rules Ontario, and the first result is the Fishing Regulations Summary. If you click that, there's 2 options. One is you can either print it all, you can download the whole format, the whole 147 odd pages, or just reference or download the section that you know. So if you know you're in Zone 7 and you just want to know what fish you can catch there and the limits, you can just click that and download that one. We're going to go ahead and download the whole thing. So if I click that, download it, it'll go to my computer. I've already done that, so let's bring up the actual document. Okay, so this is the 2021 regulations. They are good from January 1st, 2021 all the way till December 31st, 2021. Sometimes they'll have some updates down here on the front cover, but we'll reference those further into the document. So the table of contents, what we're going to talk on today is we're just going to go over the first few pages, and then I'm going to start working on the second video, which will get more into the licensing information, followed by general regulations, and then we're going to get into some zone examples and how to use it out there. Okay, so each copy always has a message from the minister. You can go ahead and read that, but it is basically saying this is a great opportunity as we all have to self-isolate or keep away from others to rediscover the joy of fishing. That's certainly what I plan to do this year, is because I can't be around in group settings and get people fishing with TackleShare, I'm going to get you fishing remotely. So I'm going to go out film, same as Taylor. We're going to have fun fishing ourselves, pass along the knowledge, and I want to see some great smiles out there with the catches you get. Here's an ad from the government. This just talks about how 100% of your license sales go towards the future of fish and wildlife in Ontario. So they last year stocked 8 million fish in lakes to help us keep fishing sport fish. They monitor and do some population research. And it also pays for the conservation officers who are out there to protect the natural resources and public safety and make sure that we are all following the rules. So here's generally what I'm following, how to use the survey. There's a whole bunch of steps. The gist of it is that you can do this yourself. The biggest takeaway from this page is down in the bottom right corner. Anything new to this year from last year will be highlighted in bold red font for your convenience. I apologize if you're colorblind and can't see that. It should be obvious, or I will try to emphasize it with the cursor as I go through that. This is a map of Ontario, and it shows the fisheries management zones. So there are 20 FMZs in Ontario. Each of them has their own different limits, rules, fish that you can catch there, or fish that are even there to begin with. It starts with number 1 way up in the far north and works its way down until Lake Ontario, which is zone 20. And one of the following videos, I'll go over how to decide which zone you're in. This is not a good map to use to figure out which zone you're in unless you know your dead center in one of them. You're going to have to go to one of their websites to zoom in further. And some of the maps on the other pages will also give you a little bit better idea, but it can get a little bit tricky right on the borders of them. There appear to be some pending changes for multiple lines for common carp and clarifying chumming regulations. So those are coming. It says spring of 2021. So when those changes happen, we'll try to update people if we're going for carp. But in the meantime, just note that if you are going for common carp or using chumming to catch fish, changes are coming. Okay, page 6 is talking about the fishing licenses that you need to fish in Ontario. This will take the better part of this video to finish out. I'm going to throw up some pictures to make it a little bit more visually appealing, but let's work our way through it. So most people require a recreational fishing license or deemed license to legally fish in Ontario, and you have to carry your outdoors card or your license summary when you're fishing. This is so that if a conservation officer asks to see your license, that you can prove that either you have one or that you do not need one. There are a couple parts to the license. The outdoors card, it's a plastic wallet-sized card that fits in your wallet or your tackle box very easily. I usually keep mine in my tackle box so that I always have it whenever I'm fishing. It's valid for 3 years and is just for administration purposes to know who you are and to track what licenses you have bought in the past. The license summary is a document that lists all the valid fishing and hunting licenses that you have. So if you are an angler and a hunter, you're going to have 3, 4, 5, 8 different listings on your summary that will be printed out at home or saved as a document on your phone or tablet, so that if you're out fishing or hunting, then you have it on you in case it's wet and the piece of paper gets wet. The province of Ontario sells 2 different types of licenses for fishing. A sport fishing license for anglers who want full catch and possession fishing privileges. That basically means if you want to catch more fish and keep more fish, then you need the sport fishing license. This is not the same as a commercial license. That's a whole different beast, but for sport fishing, I recommend that for those that want to go out and harvest a lot of the fish for their food. If you're just looking for a fun time out and looking to do mostly catch and release, I recommend the conservation fishing license. It's almost as comprehensive as the sport fishing, but you just can't catch quite as many fish of certain species, and it doesn't cost quite as much. So there's a bit of savings, but you're not able to keep as many fish at one time. There are 3 residency definitions that are used. So there's an Ontario resident, so anyone that lives in Ontario and has been here for at least 6 months during the past 12 months. Canadian residents, so if you're from Manitoba, Quebec, PEI, BC, Nunavut, you're a Canadian resident if you want to fish in Ontario. And if you're outside of Canada, you are a non-Canadian resident and will need a different license to fish. The next section of the regs talks about those that do not need to purchase a fishing license. So the first 2 that they've listed are anyone that has an accessible parking permit. Typically they're the blue wheelchair that hang from the car dashboard, and the Canadian National Institute for the Blind National Identity Card. If that applies to you, you do not need a fishing license. and you get to follow the catch and possession limits for a sport fishing license. So you get the bigger license to follow and do not need a separate fishing license. The next group of people need to have some type of permit, certificate, or general identification card issued by a government in Canada with their name, date of birth, and fishing license, and you can use that as a fishing license if you are in the following categories. If you are an Ontario or Canadian resident under 18 or older than 65, you just have to prove that that is your age and you do not need a fishing license. Anyone, doesn't matter where they're from in the world, if you are just helping the direct assistance of someone else who has a disability that is fishing, you as the helper do not need a license. We already established that persons with a disability do not need a license themselves, and neither does the person helping them. If you are helping them and fishing yourself, you do need to have your own license, because the secondary fishing with your own rod or with the rod you're using for them, but if you're not actively helping them and fishing yourself, you will need a license. A person who has a really old black and white photocopy of the accessible parking permit, I think that's a grandfathered clause, also can use that as their fishing license. And finally, members of the Canadian Armed Forces can also use that if they're an Ontario resident, can fish without a license. For those that normally need a fishing license, there are 4 times in the year where you do not need a fishing license because it is open to all Ontario and Canadian residents. Family Day weekend in February, Mother's Day, Father's Day weekends, and Ontario Family Fishing Week. There's 9 days in July where you can fish in Ontario and you do not need a license. The only caveat is that you do need to have government issued identification to prove that you are a Canadian or Ontario resident, and you must follow the limits for the conservation fishing licenses. So again, remember that is the license that doesn't cost as much but doesn't allow you to catch or keep as many fish. It's catch and release more so. So if you want to keep more fish, then you will need to get the sport fishing license. While we're on the topic of family fishing opportunities, if you want a copy of the hard copy regulations and some free fishing gear, please visit OntarioFamilyFishing.com. It's another program that I oversee in the office, and we will send out free copies of the regulations and some prizes and what for kids, because this year we won't have group events on the go because of COVID. So again, OntarioFamilyFishing.com. Register your family and when they're going to go out Family Day weekend, and we will ship something out in the coming weeks too, so that you have a copy of the regulations. The next paragraph deals with requirements for Indigenous persons with regard to fishing licenses. So many Indigenous communities in Ontario hold Aboriginal or treaty rights to fish. After conservation goals are met, Aboriginal and treaty rights to fish take priority before allocation and management of the resources for other purposes. Members of Indigenous communities exercising an Aboriginal or treaty right generally do not need an outdoors card or fishing license when fishing for food, social, or ceremonial purposes within their traditional or treaty territory. Members of Indigenous communities fishing outside of their traditional or treaty area must hold a valid fishing license and follow the corresponding seasons, limits, slot sizes, gear restrictions, or have permission from a First Nation to fish within their traditional or treaty territory. Anyone who is not an Ontario or Canadian resident is considered a non-Canadian resident for the purpose of fishing licenses. So the next page, page 8, talks about non-Canadian resident requirements. So even though if you're under 18 or over 65 in Ontario, you don't need a license. If you're not a Canadian resident, then you will need a fishing license with 2 exceptions. A non-Canadian resident under 18 years of age may fish without a license if they're accompanied by a person who has a valid fishing license. Any fish kept are part of the catch and possession limit of the person who holds the license. Alternatively, that non-Canadian under 18 years of age can still buy their own license if they want their own limit. So if a dad and daughter want to come up from the States and fish in Ontario, the daughter, who's 10 years old, does not need a license. The dad, however, does. And they can only fish as much as the dad's license allows him to catch. If they want to catch more than that, the daughter also has to have a license so that they can keep more fish. The second exception for youth that are not from Canada are those that are going to an organized camp, and the camp can have an identification card that allows them to fish within the conservation limits. Very rare instance, but that's also an option for those under 18 that are not Canadian. Also on page 8 talks about how to apply for your outdoors card and fishing license. There's the 1-800 number and the website. Again, it's for the calendar year, so if you buy a license on January 1st, it's good for all days of the year. If you buy a license on December 10th, it's only good for December 10th to December 31st. So I recommend, if you're going to fish, get it early in January and it'll last for the whole year. You get the most value out of that. If your outdoors card, license, or summary, that piece of paper with what you can fish, is lost or stolen, you can reprint it online or order a replacement plastic card, which will cost a replacement fee. New anglers are able to purchase their first outdoors card online. They can also go to a Service Ontario Centre, and there's a few local license issuers. And anyone who just wants to purchase a one-day license does not need an outdoors card. So if you want to fish one day of the year, you can buy a single-day pass, which I'll get to on the next page, and you do not need to spend the extra $8 on an outdoors card. So the license fees take effect this year. They usually increase with inflation each year. And here are the breakdown. So again, the outdoors card, it doesn't matter where you're from, it costs $8.57. It gets you this card down at the bottom here, a plastic card for your wallet. If you're an Ontario resident, you have 5 options for a fishing license. You can get that one-day sport fishing license that I just talked about. It costs you $12.21, and that is good for sport fishing for one 24-hour period. That's really a specific situation you'd want that. The other option is a 1-year conservation fishing license, so you can fish the whole year under the conservation limits for $15, or you can do a 3-year conservation for $45. I would recommend, if you like fishing, to get the 3-year. You can get it renewed at the same time as the card, so that they're both good for 3 years. You don't have to worry about renewing it each year, and it's 3 times the cost of the 1 year. So you don't save a bit of money, but you save a lot of hassle. The other 2 options are a 3-year sport fishing license, which is $71, or a 1-year sport fishing license for $26. Again, it's 3 times the cost of a 1 year. You just save some time, and this allows you to keep more fish. So if you like fishing, I recommend you get the sport fishing. If you really just like catch and release and you're not worried about keeping many fish, conservation is the way to go. And for $15 or $26 a year, that's a lot of fun activities outside, getting fresh air, fishing for a nominal cost. And all that money goes back to fishing and hunting protection, like mentioned on that one ad earlier. If you're a Canadian resident, you've got the same 5 options: a 1-day sport, 1-year conservation, 3-year conservation, 1-year sport, 3-year sport. The only difference between Ontario and Canadian residents is it costs more for Canadian residents. It's the same thing for you and I in Ontario, if we go to BC and fish, it's going to cost us more to fish than it would a BC resident. And the same 5 options apply for non-Canadian residents, except the costs are even more, but they also have 2 additional options. So if you're coming up from the States, there are 2 further options, because if you're coming up, you're probably not staying just one day, unless you're right on the border. You're probably coming up for a vacation. So if you want to come up for a fishing vacation, which I highly recommend you do, and we love seeing you up here, it is 8 days. Conservation is $31, or 8-day sport fishing license is $53. So that's cheaper than buying a whole year if you're only up for 8 days. But if you're coming up across the border more than 8 days a year, you're definitely going to want the 1 or 3 year. So for those looking to buy their first license, you just need to go to huntandfishoontario.com and click buy license and enter draws. You will need to log in, and don't have an account, start there. Create with a new outdoors card, and then you're going to put in your details. So you have 2 options to purchase the license for 2021. You can either call the 1-800 number, or you can go to fishandhuntontario.com, and you're going to want to buy a license. You need to read that preamble and click it, and then go to don't have an account, create one. Because we do not have an outdoors card, if you haven't ever got one, create with a new outdoors card. If you have an old one and know the number, you can start there so that they keep the same number. But if you want to start from scratch, create new outdoors card, then you've got to put in your details. So I'll stop there if you want to pursue that. Part 2 will be coming tomorrow, and it's going to talk about the general fishing regulations, the summary, a lot of terms that are used throughout, and we'll talk about some catch and release, how to handle, talk about ice fishing, and get into some bait and invasive species talk. And then the third part, which will come the next day, is all about how to decide where you're fishing and what you are allowed to catch, and do some examples. So stay tuned. Thanks a lot for watching today, and stay safe and have fun fishing.